Tarek, welcome, and thank you very much indeed for agreeing to do this. I'm delighted to have you taking part in this because I know that you're going to bring some really interesting perspectives to the conversations that we have on Wednesday. I want to just start off by just asking you a little bit about your background because you're here in the UK, but I think you're Canadian. Is that right?
I am Canadian. Yes, I came here to do a master's degree to the UK, and then I went and I guess I started doing a PhD, and then I was lucky enough to get a postdoc right after the PhD, and then I was lucky enough to get a lectureship right after that, and now I'm an associate professor. And of course, I met my wife here, who's English, and yeah, we have a family, I have a child, and yeah, now I'm quintessentially British, but I'm actually Canadian, right?
That's all
So
right.
yeah,
We allow those sorts of things. I think you realize that already.
yeah.
But your background is I think I'm saying originally in terms of geography. That's what you studied originally. How did you come to morph from geography across into the cultural and creative industries and the creative economy?
I started, if I thinking back to my undergraduate degree, in Canada, of course, that's where I did my undergrad. That was very much around geography, and it was human geography, but it was more health geography. So I did a lot of work in that area when I was doing my undergrad. What was important about that was actually me developing different types of research skills and research methods. I didn't know it at the time, but it was, a solid grounding in sort of quantitative methods. It wasn't until I came to the UK to do my master's degree at the University of Southampton, at the geography department, that I started to get interested in the creative industries with respect to cities, because I did an MA in urban economy and culture there, and there were numerous, very, very sort of eminent academics that were working at Southampton at the time, who had done a lot of really interesting work around culture and creativity. So I think I sort of followed in their footsteps a little bit. And because the creative industries has a very, very strong urban dynamic, um, it was relatively easy to go from geography to the creative and cultural sort of activities that make up cities. And what I was interested in at the time was creative cities and the idea of creative cities, and what and all of that was just starting to sort of bubble to the surface with Richard Florida's work. And this is like 2008, or at least his work had started to really, really gain momentum, I guess, in around 2008, 2006, 7, and 8. And then, of course, that led into what I did my PhD at the London School of Economics and also at King's College London. So, and I worked really closely with again, really, really influential academics in the field.
I'm fascinated by the fact that you're picking up on Richard Florida. We can spend a lot of time talking about that, I suspect. It'll be interesting to see what our colleagues in the Philippines make of that if that comes up in the conversation.
Of course,
The but so how would you describe yourself now in terms of kind of the focus of your work?
I'd say it's a lot more. Um, I would consider myself a cultural economist, but I think the creative industries plays a huge part in that as well. So my focus is very much around what I would call the creative and cultural industries, because I think they're both part of the same ecosystem, or at least they both feed the same ecosystem. So yes, so I'm a cultural economist, or at least I that uses different types of research methods, empiricism being highly important to what I do, and objectivity, in order to come up with answers to specific research questions around this thing that we call culture, and the industrialization of culture through the creative industries, I guess.
Now, as I understand it, you were very involved in setting up the Queen Mary's Centre for the Creative and Cultural Economy. Can you, you're one of the founders there, can you just explain a little bit about what that does and what the intention there was when you were setting it up?
Yeah, I mean, so Queen Mary University, if anybody knows, is sort of nestled in the heart of East London, and East London has always been, again, this goes back to geography, has always been, a really, really vibrant place when it comes to creative and cultural industries. It occurred to me while I was doing work there that even though we were running a massive Arts and Humanities Research Council project from 2012 to 2016, that we didn't actually have, and it was about the creative industries, we didn't have a center at the university to actually investigate, to set up a node, or at least a hub for where a lot of learning from East London could coalesce. So it felt like it was sort of incumbent on us, myself and Professor Morag Shiak, to do something about that. So we both decided that we would set up this thing post the project that we ran for the HRC. We would set up this center in order to galvanize creative and cultural work within the university, but also see how we could take advantage of the appendages that came out of that into East London as well. And because we were very much involved in sort of creating that network between creative and cultural businesses outside of the university and bringing them into academia, we felt it was an important thing to do.
And you were the director there until you left there in 2020, I think, to go to UE, the University of.
Yes, yes.
What is your role now at UE, and what is the focus of your work there?
So I'm an associate professor of creative industries at UE, Bristol. Bristol, again, being a really vibrant place for the creative and cultural industries, as we all know. And I do more research, but I also do some teaching as well. My research is around, at this specific moment, it's around thinking about the idea of organizational resilience on the back of what happened with COVID-19 for the creative and cultural sector, right? And thinking about all the different changes and challenges, especially external challenges and shocks that have been affecting the creative and cultural sector as we understand it. And of course, thinking about the changes and the transformation within the creative and cultural sector as well. I teach on the MA screen business and screen production. So I teach entrepreneurship in the creative economy, but I also teach a very, very long module name, which we are trying to change, called Developing a Screen Business for the Marketplace. So UE being the sort of Hollywood, Bristol, being the Hollywood of the UK on so many different levels. It just sort of, it was interesting that I just fell right into the sort of TV and film and screen industries. And bringing my sort of broader knowledge of the creative industries into that specific area has been really, really fruitful. So.
I mean, Bristol is known particularly for animation as well, isn't it? That's kind of where there's been a kind of a bedrock of work historically.
Of what? Say that again. Of innovation.
Animation.
Absolutely, animation, but also sort of natural history documentarian work as well. So yeah, so everything you see from all the sort of BBC natural history documentaries you see are produced in Bristol, or at least by Bristolian production companies.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a real cluster of knowledge here, and animation is really important. But also, where I work, there's a lot of creative tech organizations as well. So the creative industries has a firm foothold in the city as one of the major sort of contributors for the regional economic development of Bristol, and I would say the Southwest.
Yeah, I mean, it's a driving force in that sense for the region as well, isn't it? I mean,
it's a priority. It's definitely a priority for the region on numerous policy levels. So national, regional, and municipal, I guess.
And how have you taken your experience out into other parts of the world in terms of working with particularly countries in the global south? I know you've done some work with the British Council before.
Yes. So we did some work with the British Council in India around mapping the Durga Puja festival in West Bengal, which is very interesting because I guess one of the major findings coming out of that is how the creative and cultural sector, how you have two layers of it. You've got the formal layer of it, which is a lot more prevalent in countries like the UK. But you've also got the informal aspect of it, right? So actually trying to capture what that informality looks like with respect to informal workers is it's really difficult, number one, but also really necessary when it comes to when you're looking at something like the Durga Puja festival, which I'm not sure if you know what that is, but it's not just a festival; it's a cultural,
Well, it's intangible
behemoth.
cultural heritage as well.
Say again?
Tangible cultural heritage as well.
Oh, absolutely. But it goes to the heart. People have, that festival itself is responsible for numerous sort of careers. People make their living off working for that festival for the entire year. So it's not just about a one-off moment. So I think the importance of that type of heritage is really, and how it feeds into other aspects, like how that fed into the advertising campaigns that went around the Durga Puja festival, the TV and film components, how it links to Bollywood, how it links to all sorts of different things. So these, like, I guess, nodes of really, really important creative and cultural activities that have, like I was saying, are part of these ecosystems that have appendages that reach out of the sector. And I think informality, one aspect of it that was really important was thinking about how informal workers, oscillate between formal and informal, but also how they sustain their livelihoods through the creative and cultural economy, which is interesting because that's where the development component comes in. So it was the same in Thailand, and I was the British. I was lucky enough to work with the British Council on, and this is during COVID or just after COVID, during the second wave, I guess, of COVID, where I ran a sort of seminar, not a seminar series. I guess it was a workshop series for numerous what we call creative and cultural hubs in Southeast Asia, but also in sub-Saharan Africa. And we did it all on Zoom, and it was really interesting. And the report should be out pretty soon about that. And it was just interesting to see what the specific contextual challenges for each country were with respect to actually doing creative and cultural work. And that's everything from infrastructural challenges to, as you can imagine, to different types of ways of approaching or understanding the creative and cultural industries. There were numerous layers to what this thing that we call the creative and cultural economy is. So I think understanding it through definitions is really important, but also understanding the fact that they're ecosystemic, and that sometimes definitions can hinder how we understand the way that they work in this very, very sort of fluid and agile way, and how they affect other industries and other sectors, because all sectors connect at one point, right? So I think thinking about the ecosystem has been something that I've been working on quite, it's been something that's come up quite, importantly, I guess, with respect to the work that I'm doing. And I have an edited volume that's coming out in the new year called Global Creative Ecosystems. So looking at the idea of creative and cultural production from an ecosystemic point of view with numerous sort of case studies from around the world. So.
And I mentioned intangible cultural heritage, but do you see the distinction, for example, that UNESCO puts in place between the 2005 convention and the diversity of cultural expressions approach that's there, which they would classify as being the creative economy, and the intangible cultural heritage convention, which they don't necessarily see as being part of that. But I know, for example, from when I saw the work that you were doing in West Bengal, it was very much my perspective. My perception was that was very much focused towards actually an agenda which was, or an event which was primarily about intangible cultural heritage.
Absolutely, but I think what can be a bit misleading is having these sort of divisions around how we understand these different types of activities. Like I was saying, looking at it from an ecosystemic lens, or at least coming away from it and then looking at the data that we generated and doing an analysis on it, it was very clear that making a connection or making a distinction between, let's say, cultural heritage and the creative industries was a bit of a misnomer, because heritage incorporated elements of the creative and cultural industries in order to facilitate that work, right? Or at least those activities. And at the same time, heritage informed creative and cultural industries and creative and cultural businesses. So it all kind of ends up being part and parcel of the same thing. It's just working on different levels, right? And the different types of funding and organizational structures that affect that. So I think going back to the UNESCO question, really, really useful, right? But I also think that just as the creative and cultural industries is I wouldn't say a moving target, but it's something that's developing and evolving in numerous ways and transforming in numerous ways. I think our understanding of it needs to be as agile. And so UNESCO's understanding of it needs to incorporate some element of that agility with respect to things like, UNESCO creative cities and cultural districts, and how the creative industries and the cultural industries are anchored in place, and how people work within those ecosystems, or at least those cities. So I think there's numerous areas where we can't really rest on our laurels, if that makes any sense.
Surely, it does indeed. I think if that's all right, Tarek, I'll end it there, because I think we will have enough just to feed into the conversation by doing that.
Okay.
Thank you very much indeed.